In 1954, the U.S. government took over a remote island off the coast of New York and turned it into one of America's most secretive research facilities. For nearly 70 years, scientists conducted experiments behind closed doors on diseases that could wipe out entire animal populations. But what really happened on Plum Island goes far beyond official government reports. When strange creatures started washing up on nearby beaches and residents began falling ill with mysterious diseases, people started asking questions. The government said they were protecting America's food supply. Critics claimed they were creating biological weapons. The truth might be somewhere in between, but one thing is certain. The experiments conducted on this isolated island changed the course of biological warfare research forever. Let's start with what we know for certain. Plum Island sits just 2 miles off the tip of Long Island, New York. It's small, isolated, and for decades it was completely off-limits to the public. The official story begins in 1954, when the U.S. Department of Agriculture took control of the island and established the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. The facility's stated mission was defensive: study deadly animal diseases like foot and mouth disease and African swine fever to protect American livestock. These diseases don't typically harm humans, but they can devastate farm animals and destroy entire agricultural economies. One outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Britain cost over $10 billion in damages. But here's where the official story gets murky. Before 1954, Plum Island housed Fort Terry, a coastal defense installation that served through World War II. In the early 1950s, something changed. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps took over the island and began conducting what they called anti-animal biological weapons research. Think about that phrase for a moment. Anti-animal biological weapons. This wasn't defensive research. This was offensive bioweapons development designed to target enemy livestock and agriculture. The goal was simple but devastating: create biological agents that could cripple an enemy nation's food supply without directly harming human populations. The timing wasn't coincidental. The Cold War was heating up, and both American and Soviet scientists were racing to develop new forms of biological warfare. Traditional weapons destroyed cities and infrastructure, but biological weapons could bring down entire civilizations through starvation and economic collapse. The Army's research focused on foot and mouth disease, a highly contagious virus that spreads rapidly through livestock populations. In the wrong hands, this virus could devastate a nation's cattle, sheep, and pig populations within weeks. Military strategists saw it as the perfect weapon: invisible, unstoppable, and economically catastrophic. Military documents from this period describe plans to deploy biological agents through various methods. Aircraft could spray infected materials over enemy farmland. Saboteurs could introduce contaminated feed into livestock supply chains. Even wild animals could be infected and released to spread disease naturally across borders. The psychological warfare aspect was equally important. A successful biological attack would create mass panic among enemy populations. Food shortages would lead to civil unrest, overwhelming government resources, and destabilizing entire regions. The weapon didn't just target animals. It targeted the social fabric of enemy nations. But the Army's involvement raises uncomfortable questions. What exactly were they testing? How were they planning to deploy these biological agents? And most importantly, what safeguards were in place to prevent accidental releases? The official records from this period remain heavily classified, but we know the research continued until 1954, when operations transferred to civilian control under the Department of Agriculture. The government claimed this transition marked the end of offensive bioweapons research, but many experts remain skeptical. The timing of this transfer coincides with growing international pressure to regulate biological weapons. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 had prohibited the use of biological agents in warfare, but it didn't ban research and development. As public scrutiny increased, military research programs needed better cover stories. Transferring operations to civilian agencies provided perfect plausible deniability. Agricultural research sounded benign and defensive. Few people would question scientists studying animal diseases to protect American farms, but the same research that protected livestock could also be weaponized against enemy agriculture. The facility that emerged under civilian control was unlike anything else in America. Plum Island became the only laboratory in the United States authorized to work with live foot and mouth virus samples. The island's isolation made it the perfect location for containing deadly pathogens that could devastate mainland agriculture if they ever escaped. Scientists built state-of-the-art containment facilities with multiple levels of biological security. Air filtration systems, negative pressure chambers, and strict decontamination protocols were designed to prevent any accidental releases. Workers underwent extensive background checks and followed rigid safety procedures every time they entered the laboratory areas. The containment procedures were extraordinary by any standard. Researchers had to shower before entering secure areas and again before leaving. All clothing was incinerated after each shift. Laboratory animals were kept in sealed chambers with independent air supplies. Even waste materials went through multiple sterilization processes before disposal. Despite these precautions, the facility faced constant challenges. The salt air from the Atlantic Ocean corroded equipment and building materials. Power outages threatened refrigeration systems that preserved dangerous samples. Severe weather regularly tested the integrity of containment barriers. But even the most advanced containment systems aren't foolproof. Over the decades, several incidents raised concerns about the facility's safety protocols. In 1978, a major storm damaged the laboratory's power systems and compromised some containment procedures. Workers scrambled to maintain refrigeration units that kept deadly viruses in suspended animation. In 1991, Hurricane Bob struck Long Island with devastating force. The storm surge flooded parts of the island and knocked out backup power systems. For several critical hours, containment protocols operated on emergency batteries while staff worked frantically to restore full power. Each incident sparked new questions about what would happen if deadly pathogens ever escaped the island. The consequences could be catastrophic, not just for American agriculture, but for global food security. A single infected animal reaching the mainland could trigger an agricultural disaster that would make the Irish potato famine look minor by comparison. The facility's staff understood these risks intimately. Many researchers lived with constant anxiety about their work. They knew that one mistake, one procedural failure, one equipment malfunction could unleash biological devastation across North America. This psychological pressure took its toll. Staff turnover rates were higher than at other government research facilities. Some scientists reported nightmares about accidental releases. Others developed obsessive behaviors around safety protocols, checking and rechecking procedures multiple times. Subscribe to uncover more hidden government experiments that shaped modern warfare. As years passed, strange stories began emerging from the waters around Plum Island. Local fishermen reported unusual animal carcasses washing up on nearby beaches. Some creatures appeared to be normal animals with bizarre deformities. Others looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. The first documented incident occurred in 1981 when commercial fishermen found a seal carcass with unusual lesions covering its body. The lesions didn't match any known disease pattern, and tissue samples sent to veterinary laboratories came back inconclusive. Government officials claimed the animal had died from natural causes, but local residents weren't convinced. Similar discoveries followed with increasing frequency. In 1984, a whale carcass washed ashore with geometric patterns carved into its blubber. The cuts were too precise to be natural, suggesting human intervention. Marine biologists who examined the remains found traces of surgical tools and medical adhesives. The most famous incident occurred in 2008 when a decomposing creature washed up on a beach in nearby Montauk. The Montauk Monster, as local media dubbed it, had a hairless body, elongated limbs, and a beak-like protrusion where its mouth should have been. Photos of the creature went viral, sparking worldwide speculation about its origins. The creature's anatomy defied easy explanation. Its limbs were proportioned wrong for any known animal species. The skull shape suggested primate characteristics, but the elongated fingers resembled bird talons. Most disturbing were the surgical scars visible across the creature's torso, indicating extensive medical procedures. Government officials quickly dismissed the Montauk monster as a decomposing raccoon or dog, but many people weren't convinced. Veterinary experts who examined the photos noted anatomical features that didn't match any North American wildlife. The creature's size alone ruled out most common explanations. More strange creatures followed. In 2009, another unusual carcass appeared on a Montauk beach. This specimen showed signs of genetic modification: organs in the wrong locations, extra limbs partially formed, and tissue that appeared artificially grown rather than naturally developed. In 2010, a similar creature washed up in Panama, thousands of miles away. The discovery suggested that whatever was creating these anomalies had a much wider geographic range than previously suspected. International marine biologists began tracking similar incidents across multiple continents. Each discovery fueled new speculation about secret experiments and biological mutations. Internet communities dedicated themselves to analyzing photos and sharing theories about the creature's origins. Some proposed that Plum Island scientists were conducting genetic engineering experiments. Others suggested interdimensional portals or alien visitations. But the most serious allegations surrounding Plum Island involve Lyme disease. This debilitating illness, transmitted through tick bites, causes severe joint pain, neurological problems, and chronic fatigue. The disease was first identified in the town of Old Lyme, Connecticut, just across the water from Plum Island. The geographic connection is impossible to ignore. Lyme, Connecticut sits directly across Long Island Sound from Plum Island, approximately 25 miles away. Wind patterns and bird migration routes could easily carry infected ticks between the two locations. Some researchers have theorized that Lyme disease originated from biological weapons research conducted on the island. The theory suggests that scientists were experimenting with disease-carrying ticks as potential biological agents when some infected specimens escaped containment. The military applications of weaponized ticks were obvious. These tiny vectors could be deployed covertly behind enemy lines. Unlike conventional biological agents, infected ticks would continue reproducing and spreading disease long after their initial release. A single successful deployment could create a permanent endemic disease zone. Declassified documents from the 1950s and 1960s confirm that American military researchers were indeed studying arthropod vectors for biological warfare. The Army's biological warfare program investigated mosquitoes, flies, fleas, and ticks as potential delivery systems for various pathogens. The timing also raises questions. The first documented cases of Lyme disease appeared in the 1970s, decades after research had begun on the island. This timeline matches the theoretical incubation period for an escaped biological weapon to establish itself in wild tick populations. However, mainstream scientists strongly dispute the bioweapon's origin theory. They point to evidence that Lyme disease existed long before Plum Island's research facility was established. Museum specimens of infected ticks date back to the 1940s, and some researchers claim the disease may be thousands of years old. Archaeological evidence complicates the timeline further. Some researchers have found Lyme disease bacteria in ice core samples dating back centuries. Others have identified similar bacterial strains in ancient Egyptian mummies, suggesting the disease has ancient origins. The debate over Lyme disease origins highlights a broader problem with Plum Island. The extreme secrecy surrounding its operations made it impossible for independent researchers to verify what was actually happening inside the facility. For nearly 70 years, the public was told to trust that the research was purely defensive and that proper safeguards were in place. But without transparency or independent oversight, conspiracy theories flourished in the absence of verified facts. The secrecy also created a perfect environment for disinformation campaigns. Foreign intelligence services could easily spread false rumors about American bioweapons research, knowing that the U.S. government couldn't publicly refute claims without revealing classified information. Soviet propaganda during the Cold War repeatedly accused American scientists of developing biological weapons at Plum Island. These accusations gained credibility precisely because the U.S. government couldn't provide detailed refutations without compromising legitimate security interests. This information warfare aspect of Plum Island is often overlooked, but it may be the most significant part of the story. By conducting secret biological research, the American government inadvertently created a propaganda weapon that enemies could use to undermine public trust in U.S. institutions. The facility's reputation for secrecy attracted attention from conspiracy theorists worldwide. Internet forums dedicated enormous resources to analyzing satellite photos of the island, tracking personnel movements, and collecting anecdotal reports from local residents. Some conspiracy theories bordered on science fiction. Claims about human-animal hybrids, time travel experiments, and alien autopsies became associated with Plum Island, despite having no basis in reality. These outlandish theories served to discredit legitimate concerns about biological weapons research. In 1969, President Nixon officially ended America's offensive biological weapons program, but research at Plum Island continued under the banner of defensive studies. The distinction between offensive and defensive research, however, is often academic. The same knowledge needed to defend against biological weapons can also be used to create them. This dual-use problem plagued biological research throughout the Cold War. Scientists studying natural disease outbreaks gained expertise that could be applied to biological warfare. Defensive research required understanding exactly how biological weapons would work, making it functionally identical to offensive weapons development. International treaties attempted to address this problem by distinguishing between research purposes, but enforcement remained nearly impossible. How could outside observers determine whether scientists were developing vaccines to protect against biological weapons or creating the weapons themselves? Plum Island existed in this gray area for decades. Its researchers genuinely contributed to agricultural disease prevention, developing vaccines and treatment protocols that saved countless farm animals. But the same research could be weaponized with minor modifications. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Plum Island expanded its research programs to include new diseases and more sophisticated containment technologies. The facility became a model for high-security biological research, attracting scientists from around the world who wanted to study dangerous pathogens in controlled environments. The research programs diversified beyond foot and mouth disease to include African swine fever, blue tongue virus, and other transboundary animal diseases. Each pathogen required specialized containment procedures and presented unique risks for accidental release. International collaboration brought additional challenges. Foreign scientists working at the facility required extensive security clearances and monitoring. Cultural differences in safety protocols led to conflicts and misunderstandings that sometimes compromised research effectiveness. But the island's isolation that made it perfect for containing dangerous diseases also made it difficult to attract and retain qualified researchers. Many scientists were reluctant to work in such a remote location, and staff turnover became a persistent problem. The isolation affected more than just staffing. Equipment repairs and maintenance required special transportation arrangements. Supply deliveries faced weather delays that could compromise time-sensitive experiments. Even basic communications with the outside world were restricted for security reasons. Family life proved especially challenging for Plum Island staff. The island had no schools, requiring parents to send children to boarding schools or live separately from their families. Social isolation led to high rates of depression and anxiety among facility personnel. By the 2000s, the aging facility was showing its limitations. The buildings were decades old, and newer biosafety technologies weren't easily retrofitted into the existing structures. Maintenance costs were skyrocketing as salt air continued corroding equipment and infrastructure. The September 11th attacks added new security concerns to the facility's operations. The Department of Homeland Security took control from the Department of Agriculture, implementing additional security measures that further restricted access and increased operational costs. New biosafety standards required extensive facility upgrades that would cost billions of dollars. Rather than renovating the aging Plum Island complex, government planners decided to build a completely new facility with state-of-the-art containment systems. In 2023, operations officially transferred to the new National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Kansas. This modern laboratory features the most advanced containment systems ever built and can handle an even wider range of dangerous pathogens. The Kansas facility represents everything Plum Island couldn't be. Located in the continental United States, it offers better access to qualified personnel and supporting infrastructure. Modern containment technologies provide superior safety margins, and transparent oversight mechanisms address long-standing public concerns about secrecy. The closure of Plum Island marked the end of an era, but it also raised new questions about the island's future. Environmental cleanup efforts have revealed contamination from decades of research activities. Soil samples show traces of biological agents that may persist for years. Underground storage areas contained materials that had been forgotten for decades. Some waste disposal sites dated back to the military research period of the 1950s, containing substances that were never properly catalogued or secured. Plans to preserve the island as public or environmental space face significant challenges due to this contamination. Full environmental remediation could take decades and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. As Plum Island's laboratories fall silent after nearly 70 years of secret research, one question remains unanswered. Government documents from the facility's early years remain classified, locked away in federal archives where they may stay for decades to come. What those documents contain could fundamentally change our understanding of American biological weapons research. But there's something else. Recent Freedom of Information Act requests have uncovered references to a research program that has never been publicly acknowledged. The program's code name appears in heavily redacted documents from the 1960s and 1970s, but its purpose remains completely classified. The program's existence suggests that Plum Island's research may have extended far beyond what the public has ever been told. And if that's true, then the real story of what happened on that isolated island